Today's presentation is titled Managing Risks Through IP Innovation Management Training. I'm Zahal Reed, Senior Attorney at Medmark's Risk Management Department. On behalf of Medmark and today's presenter, James Hastings, thank you for joining us. James Hastings is an intellectual property attorney and consultant with more than 20 years of experience representing healthcare, technology, and consumer goods clients. James is a certified legal Lean Sigma practitioner and uses the Lean Six Sigma method for IP portfolio management and client advisory services. The Lean method helps provide innovative companies deliver value through efficiencies and reducing waste in IP portfolio and risk management processes. James is the editor of the online publication Healthcare Marketing Law and is a presenter at the Third Digital Health Symposium at United Nations General Assembly 78. His commentary on intellectual property and brand protection has been featured in Law.com, Bloomberg, BNA, and other leading national media outlets. And with that, I will turn it over to James.
Well, Alyssa, thank you so much, and thank you everyone for joining. I'm really pleased to join you today on this subject. It's not your typical dry legal subject. It has many business applications. And of course, the subject is mitigating risks through IP innovation management training. So we're going to talk today a little about a few things. Number one is some definitions of what is innovation, what is management, what is intellectual property, and how do these all come together to allow people to embed processes at organizations so these processes can better help you identify and manage risks in your intellectual property portfolio. Now, I thought there's many definitions with innovation, but this is a good one. Innovation is change that unlocks new value. And there's a couple of good words in there, or terms that we should recognize. First of all, it's generally change. It has to be something that is uncomfortable to some, and it requires change management. And it unlocks new value in terms of either incremental value or a completely new idea or process that is beneficial to an organization. So our discussion today, we're going to talk about a few things: the why, the what, and the how. And for you consultants, it's really the present state, future state, and the gap analysis of how we get to the future state when it comes to IP innovation management. We're going to talk about the challenge currently, or the problem, which is IP-related legal risks in the life sciences and technology sectors continue to grow. The opportunity is IP innovation management training and programs can help mitigate certain risks while capturing and protecting asset value, and most importantly, on a consistent and repeatable and reliable basis, which is very important when it comes to processes. And we'll talk about that a little more. And of course, the how, or the future state to get there. We'll cover many things today. One of the goals of this presentation is to make things as simple as possible, a top-level discussion, so we don't get too far in the weeds. And really, coming out of it, what are some simple action steps for IP innovation management training, as well as the first steps necessary to begin that journey? Now, before we move on into slide, there are a couple of things that are obvious but bear repeating, and that is the value of assets. You know, in our personal lives, we have intangible and tangible assets. Tangible assets are, of course, things such as our homes and our cars, which are the number two most highly insured assets, and everybody does insure them. And we also have processes in place to mitigate risks with cars or our homes, right? And our health as well, by the way. We have processes in place with cars where there's either driver ed, or we go to the mechanic to make sure that our car is always tuned up. We don't have deflated tires. We're not prone to greater accidents or risks on the road. We follow speed limits. We do all these things really to mitigate risks and to ensure safety in our personal life. And the same with health. We ensure our health. And we also have processes to optimize our health and mitigate health risks. We may go to the gym, we eat properly. Many of us have coaches in terms of, health and fitness coaches that we may work out with, or nutritionists. And here's where I'm getting at. When we translate risk and mitigating those risks and optimizing value to the business world, and specifically intangible assets, which we're talking about today, it's really a hodgepodge of protection. Now, yes, all of you who are on this presentation today rightly insure your companies and your intellectual property and your creations, but not everybody, and I'm not talking about on this presentation necessarily, but in the general audience, not everyone in business or even technology businesses or life sciences or health tech business has processes in place to both identify and capture incremental value in their intellectual properties, as well as mitigate the risks associated with those intellectual properties. Now, that being said, there's many companies that rely on outside counsel for doing that. They may have a designated person internally. But again, what we're talking about is a holistic approach and a cross-departmental approach to IP innovation management and IP innovation management training to achieve these goals. And it's fairly new, and which we'll proceed to talk about, but that's why it's somewhat exciting, and hopefully it will be beneficial to you all. So let's start with some common definitions and facts and figures to hopefully emphasize the importance of why IP innovation management is crucial in the health tech and life science industries. So some definitions. We're talking about IP innovation management, and let's break that down. Intellectual property on the upper left generally refers to patents, trade secrets, copyright, trademark, and of course, the associated goodwill of consumers or patients in the health field. And those are all what we call intangible assets. All of those examples there are intangible assets of great value to companies. With regard to patents, there are utility patents, there are design patents, there are plant patents. With regard to trademarks, trademarks are any name or symbol that's used to identify a source or an origin of a good or service, and that has associated goodwill as well. And of course, copyright are original expressions of ideas that are reduced to tangible form. Trade secrets also, which are very important in the life sciences area and the health tech area, have really three elements. Information that either is actual or potential independent value by virtue of not being generally known. So part of the definition is it has to be a secret. It has value to others who cannot legitimately obtain the information, and it is subject to reasonable efforts to maintain its secrecy. And while we won't get into it today deeply, the types of intellectual property and how to protect, I will say that all of these areas have direct implications in the life sciences and the health tech industries, both in terms of medical devices, information, security, privacy, and other areas. So that's intellectual property. Innovation, we discussed up top, something new that creates value and desired outcomes. And one of the most important things about value is always in the eyes of the beholder. Generally with drugs and pharma, well, it's obvious because there's biological values, there's health values. That is really an objective value. Sometimes in our industry, there are values that are really actual or perceived in the eyes of the consumer. And innovation is trying to always move towards value in the eyes of the consumer, as well as IP innovation management. We always start with a question, which we'll discuss in a little bit. What are we trying to achieve as the organization vis-a-vis our stakeholders? And finally, management is most importantly, for purposes of today's discussion, it's a repeatable system or process from ideation to implementation. And we'll get into that a little more and discuss a little bit Lean Six Sigma and how that overlays on IP innovation management. So let's get into some figures here about why IP innovation management. Now, small, medium enterprises are generally referred to, the SMEs, as companies that have 500 or less employees, and it varies, $10 million or less, or even up to $50 million or less revenue per year. And we note that SMEs that own IP rights have a 68% higher revenue per employee than those who do not own any IP rights. And I'm going to discuss some of these data figures because I want to emphasize for all of us the importance and the value of IP rights and processes in place, both to protect those values as well as mitigate the risks associated with those values. So another interesting statistic from BCG, Most Innovative Companies Survey of 2023 of over 1,000 innovative company executives. It's really no surprise that 79% of global companies rank innovation as a top 3 priority in 2023. And it isn't a surprise when we realize that the intangible assets value of companies, particularly high-tech companies, represents more than 90% of their value, as opposed to tangible assets, which are things like inventory, buildings, etc. And included in that value is human resources and intangible assets as well. So when we're looking at high-tech companies and the life sciences and pharma industries and the healthcare industries, and their value lies predominantly, overwhelmingly, in intellectual property and in intangible assets associated with it, again, why not have IP innovation management programs embedded in those organizations to identify the risks, mitigate those risks, and hopefully capture incremental value associated with their creations? So, reinforcing the last slide, this was a really interesting survey from the European Intellectual Property Organization about high growth firms and intellectual property rights. 110% greater likelihood of high growth for SMEs and high-tech industries that have filed 1 or more patents, and a 33% greater likelihood of high growth for SMEs that file for IP bundle protection, which means more than one type of IP, over than a company that just files one type of IP protection. Another interesting data point on this slide, which I did not mention, there is a 110% greater likelihood of high growth for SMEs and high-tech industries. From what I recall, the percentage is even higher for low-tech industries that capture and protect their IP rights. So I thought that was very interesting. All right, so hopefully we set up the importance both quantitatively and qualitatively of why IP innovation management is so important. Now let's see the skills gap in the present state, and it's pretty glaring. More than 60% of executives plan to boost investment in innovation, yet 74% of companies are not prepared to scale innovation, and they've identified their #1 skills gap as innovation management practices. And that's not really surprising, really, in terms of current processes within companies. You may have a dedicated person in a department who's the innovation person, or a team who are the innovation people. But how many companies really have cross-functional teams and emphasize the importance of that team and align it with the business objectives and the innovation and intellectual property objectives of the company? It's really a symbiotic relationship of all of those three. And the skills gap is there. And as a result, there are lost opportunities to create and capture incremental value associated with intellectual property. And unfortunately, there are greater likelihoods and incremental risks inherent by not having these processes in place. So let's talk about IP litigation risks, particularly in the life sciences and the health industry. Trade secrets litigation is on the rise. And again, when we're talking life sciences and health, predominantly the issues in terms of intellectual property are patent infringement and trade secrets infringement. Of course, there are copyright issues and copyright infringement and trademark, but for now, we're going to focus on those two. Trade secrets litigation is on the rise. $3 billion have been awarded based on this stout report from 2020 in damages, monetary damages. The success rate of these cases is 68% for plaintiffs or the parties that are bringing those cases against the defendant. And of course, the top risk sectors, which should be no surprise, include health and IT. And of course, there's a convergence of health and IT particularly with artificial intelligence and machine learning that is part and parcel of the field now. Similarly, risk trends are on the rise with global life sciences and biosimilars with regard to litigation. It may not surprise some of you that the #1 sector for published patents worldwide are life sciences patents and related patents in the health sector. And of course, the major litigation areas, we're talking about IP and IP innovation management, but this is very important to emphasize. If we don't have a proper IP innovation management program in place, it impacts all sorts of legal fields. The typical ones in IP, which is patent, trademark, copyright, and trade secret, but also the related fields of product liability and regulatory matters such as the FTC and the FDA in terms of medical device approvals, healthcare marketing, what we can say and what we can't say, what we can do with patient information, HIPAA, PHI, and of course, privacy that goes along with that, and digital health with AI and machine learning. I was at a very interesting symposium last week, which I was the convener for as part of the Digital Health United Nations Symposium. And it was based on a real life scenario of a device, an at-home monitoring device that was invented by a university. They collected the data of the vitals of the patients who were in the program, and they were uploaded, those vitals, and all sorts of issues arose, all of these that we're talking about. We didn't resolve anything there. It was really an issue spotting exercise. But if you don't handle certain information right, if you don't have security in place, if you don't have regulatory things in place, your risks heighten. So the benefits of IP innovation management, of course, that it's twofold. We have monetization and we have mitigation. So on the left-hand side are some monetization examples. We build up our IP portfolio in these intellectual properties, such as trade secret or copyright or patent or trademark. Most importantly, by doing so, we attract and secure investors. Investors these days and venture capital investors are very, very interested in IP portfolios and what types of protections are in place at companies. And our studies in this really show two interesting things about IP and venture capital companies. First of all, when they're looking at IP, it's generally at the due diligence phase. If they're looking to invest in a company, they're looking at the portfolio of the startup or the scale up to see what they have protected, what other intangibles they have and their assets, what types of systems they have in place for that protection. And then, of course, the next phase to look at the intellectual property from a venture capital and investor perspective is really the exit stage. Yet we found the greatest stage that has the highest risk gap is the operational stage, the day-to-day operational stage of once an investor invests in a health tech entity, a startup or a scale up, what systems and processes are in place, both on the left-hand side of this slide, to build up all of the intangibles and monetization and exploitation opportunities of that intellectual property, and what processes and procedure are in place on the right-hand side of this slide to mitigate risks in all of these areas. So we went through the why IP innovation management is so important in the health tech and life sciences industries. Let's talk a little bit about what ISO 56005 is and the title of it is IP Innovation Management, which is a standard. So ISO are standards that are worldwide standards for really quality control and processes for manufacturing and services industries in all sorts of different areas. And it provides a process and quality framework. And particularly with IP innovation management standards, they only came out in December 2020 as part of a series of the International Standards Organization in Innovation Management. The IP Innovation Management Series is a process and quality framework to support and integrate the role of IP within innovation management. And again, as I've discussed before, for the purpose of identifying, protecting, and monetizing IP value, and to mitigate IP, legal, and business risks associated with those management activities. And most importantly here is the phrase on the bottom. In order to have an effective IP management program, we really have to have ongoing, measurable, and repeatable processes. They have to be simple. They have to engage cross-departmental teams. And the whole goal here is continuous process improvement in terms of process improvement for capturing and monetizing value. And on the insurance side, continuous process improvement for mitigating risks. So that's a little overview of IP innovation management with the ISO standard. As I had mentioned, that these standards have been adopted by leading companies worldwide to ensure excellence in process and quality management. It includes both asset and risk protection. As I mentioned before, in this slide, I said that intangible assets of innovative companies now account for over 80% of their book value. Really now it's over 90%. And ISO IP innovation management programs can help reduce the risks inherent in the life science and health tech sectors. Again, the benefit of the standardization of an innovation management program, or technically the ISO 56005 is a guideline. It's not a mandatory standard. It is a guideline that's encouraged for companies to use who are innovative. And these programs can be customized to further your own goals and reduce the business and legal cost associated in achieving those goals. So what I'm going to do here is talk a little about, an overview, a high level, of some of the principles of IP innovation management. They include realization of value for all relevant stakeholders. Now, again, defining value, and I'll get into it a little later on, if IP innovation management encourages a process and the implementation of a process with regard to intellectual property and the management of opportunities and risks, well, that process has to have value and it has to have defined value. So generally in the process, the first thing we do is define value in the eyes of the stakeholder. And this segues into a type of process mechanism that we can overlay to IP innovation management that I'll discuss briefly, which is Lean Six Sigma methodology for process improvement, which I am a yellow belt of, and have led certain teams on how to go about looking at your existing processes in a particular area, for example, IP innovation management, how to map your current state, and then how to move on from there. And I'll get onto that in a little bit. The other additional principles of to create future-focused leaders, not just in your innovation department or your researchers or your scientists, but across the company. And to align your innovation strategy with the management of your business, together with the alignment with your intellectual property objectives in terms of protection, mitigating risks, not just vis-a-vis competitors, but even internally. Do you have proper agreements in place with your employees with regard to intellectual property? Do you have proper agreements in place with your vendors? So it's really a holistic approach of what we look at in terms of these principles. course, to promote an innovation culture is something that seems obvious, but it creates great benefits. And to identify incremental value capture opportunities that we've talked about again. In our business, particularly from the legal perspective, we see a lot of companies leave certain apples on the ground that they walk by. And they do so because they don't realize, first of all, that it has value, or they don't have a process in place to identify that value. And this is what, again, IP innovation management can help to do. We can help create issue spotters within the company and within the organization on how to capture IP and how to mitigate the risks associated with it. And you don't need the solutions. We don't look to the IP innovation management team in a company to know everything. That's not really their job. The goal of the program is to create the processes to be great issue spotters and to have consistent and measurable processes that create value in these areas. And of course, the biggest thing, which is one of the principles of IP innovation management, is seen at letter F, as in Frank, to manage uncertainty and mitigate the risks associated with your intellectual property and the activities associated with your marketplace activities. And again, not just patent or copyright or trademark, but all of these other activities we've talked about: marketing, regulatory, and related issues such as AI and machine learning. So the scope of IP innovation management under this standard is to create an IP strategy to support innovation in an organization, to establish systematic IP management within the innovation process, and to apply consistent IP tools and methods in support of efficient IP management. Now, this is where we kind of segue to Lean Six Sigma. Lean Six Sigma is a process, and I was just looking at one of my brochures here where we kind of promote our Lean Six Sigma program. I'll just read from there if you allowed me to. Lean Six Sigma is a management method designed to improve client satisfaction by increasing efficiencies, which can also reduce costs. Doing things the right way at the right time and for the right reasons are some of the core principles of lean management. By adopting a lean IP protection system, companies can work together to create greater value and predictability in processes, which could result in reduced legal fees, mitigation of risks, greater predictability in the process. Now, one of the fascinating kind of fun things with Lean Six Sigma is there's an acronym for this process, which could be overlaid to IP innovation management, and that's known as DMAIC: design, measure, analyze, improve, and control. One of the first things we do in this type of exercise and applying it to IP innovation management, we would develop a charter statement with the company and say, okay, what are we trying to achieve here in terms of IP innovation management at the company? What are our future state goals with IP innovation management? Why is it so important and vital that we get on board with this program? What are we seeking to achieve with the mitigation of risks? And of course, what is our skills gap to getting there, to the future state of an ideal IP innovation management program? So one of the great benefits and kind of fun exercises in a Lean Six Sigma process is process mapping. And what we literally do is, for example, if we're going to process map an IP innovation management and what we do within the company, or for that matter, any other process you can apply it to, Lean Six Sigma within a company. We take Post-its and all different colored Post-its. And what we do first is map out current processes. And let's, again, for this example, IP innovation management. What are we doing internally? What are we doing externally? And literally step by step, it's a group exercise. So across the top, we kind of have the parent categories of the sequence of steps we currently have in place. And if we have gaps, it's okay. We're not trying to solve the problem. We're trying to accurately reflect where we are today. So IP innovation management, applying Lean Six Sigma, we would say, all right, what do we have in place in terms of identifying intellectual property? First of all, even before that, defining and having a common definition within the organization of intellectual property and why is it so important? So we first map that out horizontally across the top. And then what is the sequence of identifying, capturing, protecting with registration or other types of protection protocols? What do we do internally to achieve those goals presently? And how do we work with external partners and vendors to achieve those goals? Now, again, if there's gaps, completely okay. We're just trying to map out the process presently as it exists. Once we map out that process, we kind of step back and everybody looks at it. They may add something, may take something off. And by the way, for each of those parent categories going across, you put vertically in those columns sub-processes or steps that are related to that vertical column. And you just take more Post-its, map out those processes. The end goal is to look at what you have and then identify wastes in the processes in terms of too many steps, overproduction. There's some other waste in innovation management. It could be economic waste, bringing in people when you don't need to bring in people. It could be lack of training or lack of knowledge. And then we move on finally to create the better mousetrap. Once we identify and eliminate waste, okay, how do we streamline our processes, make it more aerodynamic, more predictable, with the ultimate goal of getting to the end user stakeholder? That could be a patient or consumer in the life sciences and health tech field, or it could be internal stakeholders as well. But we're always looking at how do we reach the goal of IP innovation management in this particular exercise quicker, faster, more efficiency, and with greater predictability. And that's really Lean Six Sigma in a nutshell, again, a very brief nutshell, and how we can apply it to IP innovation management. So we're going to talk a little about the solution here of IP innovation management and training and implementation. Again, there are many steps, but we always have to start somewhere, and it really kind of creates a lot of positive buzz within an organization to start identifying why IP innovation management is so important, how to embed it in the organization, and how to proceed to achieve those goals. I will say, with just like any management program, and we'll use certain digital tools to help facilitate the goals in those programs. The more complicated a program is, and you know all of this by experience, whether it's a digital tool to help facilitate the program or the processes involved, we're not going to have the adoptability of and the buy-in of our stakeholders if it's too complicated, if there's too many steps, if the tools that we use to help facilitate those goals are too complicated. You know, I don't know, like you, I would say like myself, I have a smartphone. I may use 30% of its capabilities. I don't need all the time 70% of the other capabilities. And of course, there's certain CRM tools and other tools within organizations that do great things, but at the same time, there's not a high adoptability rate by the users. I read a stat last week, which was very interesting, on salespeople within organizations and marketing people who use customer relationship management software. I mean, that's their bread and butter, customer relationship management software. And even out of that group of salespeople and marketers, only it was a little less than 40% who actually used it repeatedly. Now, I can tell you firsthand, we've tried to use that in our own organization. And again, there's a lot of choices. Some of it's too robust. It gets too complicated, and we don't get buy-in across departments. So I will encourage you, if you are thinking about an IP innovation management program and tools to facilitate those programs, keep it simple, keep it simple, keep it simple. So we talked before about the alignment of your business goals, your innovation goals, and your IP strategies. And that's what this international standard 56005 does. Merges your business goals with the innovation strategies on the left and IP management strategies on the right. Let's look at those briefly. Innovation strategies under this guideline of 56005 This is really in sequential order from top to bottom. You first identify the opportunities. You create concepts or inventions. You test and validate those concepts. You develop solutions. And then you deploy solutions. And then the Lean Six Sigma context, you're always seeking to improve upon those solutions on an ongoing basis. In other words, you just do continuous, not just product improvement, but process improvement as well. And those innovation strategy steps that you see on the left are baked into the ISO 56005 standard. It's not just for creations of the mind with regard to intellectual property, but the processes that are involved in achieving your goals. And of course, ISO 56005, which is titled IP Innovation Management, also merges your innovation strategy with your intellectual property management. That includes research and analysis of certain ideas. It could be internal or external. Methods to generate it in terms of, inventor notebooks or other systems or processes that are essential in the capture and identification of your intellectual property assets. If you're not using your own assets, perhaps you're seeking to acquire or license third-party assets. In the health sciences field, this typically comes into place with open source innovation. And for example, in the medical device industry, where many of these platforms are built on open source, we have to determine whether or not, if any improvements to the open source are within the realm of the originator or the creator of that open source innovation. Sometimes it's all public domain. If you improve upon a platform, your improvements have to be shared with the rest of the people who use it. There's other agreements with open source that says that the open source is public domain, but any incremental improvements can be owned by the original owner of the base creation and then licensed to you for some sort of royalty figure. And there's other agreements that say anyone who makes improvements on an open source platform can protect it. And it really changes depending on the contractual situation with these types of open source things. So IP innovation management also includes protection and registration of intellectual property in the patent area, in the trade secret, copyright, and trademark fields or sectors. There is the maintenance, which is always important, of IP management, particularly with your outside law firms. Maintenance is everything of IP. There's registrations where you have to submit certain filing fees and certain proof of use. For example, with trademarks, you have to prove or put in declarations of continuous use between the fifth and sixth year post-registration and a filing fee for that. There's renewal between the 9th and 10th years of registration. So there's all these docketing issues that are involved. Now, I'm not sure if those who are on, there may be some lawyers who, of course, are deep into docketing of maintenance issues with IP management. There are some people who are on who may be in-house or tangentially involved with docketing and leave it to their outside counsel. But when it comes to maintenance, without these systems in place, it really opens you up not only to losing your IP rights, you could lose patents, you could lose trademarks, but also in the case of a law firm, it could open you up to malpractice if you don't have these proper systems in place. Exploitation is another phrase for monetization. ISO standard for IP innovation management helps you to exploit your assets or potentially exploit them through partnerships, through licensing, and potentially through exit strategies. Again, it doesn't provide all the solutions within the standard, but it helps you to issue spot in these areas. And finally, risk management, which incorporates all of these things. Your innovation management standard and training help you to align everything that is reflected on this page. I want to focus for a moment on IP risk management within the framework of the IP innovation management standard, only because And for good reason, we're here with Medmark, and this is all about mitigating risks. And there is a section within 56005 on IP risk management and the steps that we put in place to help facilitate those goals. There are really two types of IP risk management. There are internal IP risks and there are external IP risks. So internal IP risks arise where an organization can lack an understanding of IP management and risk assessment. And I'll back up again, which is important to emphasize, which I did before. They may have different definitions or no knowledge of what various types of intellectual property there are to even protect or manage. So we really have to start with that base definition that is understood with all of those stakeholders cross-departmentally within an organization, that they can understand and convey to both their internal stakeholders and vendor partners. Internal IP risks also arise where there are lack of adequate processes or controls to manage those risks. So I just mentioned where the company or their internal or external partners fail to understand the company's intellectual property. Most importantly, where there lack relevant skills and training associated with IP innovation and management. And again, even with the training, there are companies that lack the appropriate resources to really have a continuous, effective program where it is repeatable, where it is measurable, and where it consistently improves the value of the company and its stakeholders. So there are certain external IP risks inherent in an organization that IP innovation management guidelines address. These arise where external partners, or actually the company, has not conducted a freedom to operate analysis. And really a freedom to operate analysis is within the patent context in the life sciences and health fields, where you're looking at third-party competitors, disclosed patents, claims, competitive features to see, all right, am I bumping up against any other third-party rights? What is the likelihood that we're engaging in infringing activities? It could be devastating to both startups and scale-ups. I mean, they'd be dead in the water, and it's also highly devastating to established companies. So some of those external IP risks are not having that freedom to operate system in place. For example, with IP innovation management, when do we seek out a freedom to operate analysis? The external IP risks also arise where the organization has IP that is being infringed. First of all, do they have a method and process to monitor third-party marketplace? It's a good job that's done with trademark and brand protection, particularly with digital tools and brand protection tools that are available now, or even technologies that allow companies with design logos to scan the web for where their logo shows up on third-party websites, and they can have the automatic takedowns. So it becomes very efficient. It's not always perfect, but there's some aspects of this which are do it yourself. Some are do it for me, and some are do it with me. And we'll discuss that in a little bit. External IP risks arise also where the organization is unaware of laws and regulations related to legal and risk compliance areas. Now, here's the greatest thing and comfort to remember in this area. You don't need to be an expert if you're not a lawyer tasked with those areas. But IP innovation management training helps you all to become good issue spotters, which is most important. You don't need the answers, but it's helpful to identify issues. So you pick up the phone to your, innovation management partner, whether it's a consultant like we do, and or your attorneys, and say, hey, I think we have an issue here. I just want to run it by you. And hopefully you're not being charged hourly for that you have an open line of communications as part of your fee structure for IP innovation management, where you can ask as many questions as you want for the purposes of your common goals. External IP risks also arise where the organization is at risk of IP theft, cyber attacks, and patent trolls, particularly in the life sciences and health tech industry. There are still non-practicing entities of patents, meaning that they are patent. They're people who grab rights to patents, and they're not practicing the invention, and they write cease and desist letters and try to extricate a license deal, or they sue for infringement. and they're really IP pirates, for lack of a better phrase. And that's always something that's tangible and out there that we need to address in mitigating risks. And again, an IP innovation management program, one of the great things about it is it helps to identify incremental improvements in your technologies or in your intellectual assets. When you're going along in any company, innovation by definition is agile, and it's always continuous improvement. So where there is continuous improvement to a base protectable idea, there are always opportunities for greater IP protection for those improvements. And IP innovation management also allows you to do that and to make sure, with regard to external IP risks, for example, that you have proper agreements in place with your vendors. And one of the most important is, for trade secret, it would be non-disclosure agreements for things that vendors are creating with you or for you. Work for hire agreements in the copyright area, which says not only do you get the underlying product that they're creating for you or service, but you also get ownership of the intellectual property for that product or service or that creation. Because if you don't have it, a work for hire, they can have the rights and retain the intellectual property rights. It really holds your whole company hostage. So what are some next steps? And again, we don't want to overwhelm today, but there could be very simple ones. One of the things which I mentioned before is the phrase of, do it yourself, do it with me, or do it for me. And we kind of do all things in our area and our services. We help companies with their IP innovation management programs, establishing them in terms of Lean Six Sigma exercises, mapping out the program, and going to the first step. So what is the first step, or what could it look like? First step could be on the left, which is really your discover phase. And this is a typical engagement where you develop a charter statement where you say, okay, as we mentioned before, in like the Lean Six Sigma example, what are we trying to achieve here in terms of our IP management goals? And of course, we help you in plugging in the standards of what you're trying to achieve. But what we are trying to achieve economically, culturally, reduction of risks, capturing certain marketplace advantages, and you define value up front. And then you engage in your current state and your exercise. And before you map your process, it's which I'll show over on the right, is really it's best to do an audit of your current intellectual property. And that doesn't need assistance because most people don't know what all their intangible assets or intellectual property assets are in the company. Sure, they may know that certain trademark registrations or copyright registrations or patent registrations are assets or intangible assets of the company. But there's a wealth of other areas that may not be identified and captured. So we always recommend in the beginning to do an IP audit. And once you do that audit, to map the process on the left, as I have under the Discover area, to identify efficiencies in the process, and then to moving to the center to design your future state framework using these IP innovation management principles in terms of systems, processes, roles and responsibilities, tools and methods, and how you measure success, which is vital to any program and the effectiveness of any program. What are our measurements for success? And how do we create continuous process improvement? And how do we make it agile as well? This is, like all innovation management is agile. It's never static. You're continuously improving. At least that's the goal. You're either continuously improving to make things faster, more efficient, and reduce your risks, and to hopefully create incremental value to the company economically as well. Finally, implementation could look something like identify, create, validate, develop, and deploy, which we talked about, where we set up the IP innovation management program after taking those first two steps on the left and center column. We've looked at our IP risk audit in terms of, all right, where are the glaring holes? How do we bridge the gap in those holes? And what do we need to achieve those goals? So for example, it could be as simple as, we never sought registration for a particular sub-brand that we were using, or for certain goods and services that we're using. And this is in the context of trademark. And it may be an opportunity to achieve those protections right now. It also could be IP risk audit remediation in the terms of human resources, whether it's employees or outside vendors or third parties. What do we need to do to tighten up contractual relationships with them? As I mentioned before, is it a non-disclosure agreements for the innovations? Is it work for hires that we have to have people sign who are outside vendors who are doing work for us to make sure that we own the underlying IP of their creations? And again, that's vital. That, matter of fact, one of the first things you should probably do is make sure that any outside vendors you have work for hire agreements to make sure that the underlying IP is within your realm. One of the glaring examples at the advent of the internet with that, what were your domain name, your website creators and your website vendors, where they'd say, don't worry, I can register your domain name for you. And then you're not satisfied with them and your website, and you say a year later, hey, I want to move on. They say, well, not so fast. I own the website, meaning they own both the domain name and they own the underlying assets on the website. So again, very, very important to make sure that you have work for hires as part of this IP risk audit remediation steps. And of course, as part of your implementation, there's opportunities that result out of your audit to identify, protect, register these intellectual assets, potentially licensed ones. There's a really interesting book, Rembrandt's in the Attic, where IBM had a bunch of dusty patents sitting around, hundreds of them, if not thousands. And they weren't using them. And they kind of went into the attic and took them out and thought, okay, how can we license the underlying rights, intellectual property rights to these creations to third-party, non-competitive third parties? And I think within about 10 years, maybe a little longer, the IP patents that they were not using accounted for something like 7 or 8% of their total revenue. So that's a really interesting example. Finally, ongoing education and training in these areas, both with regard to IP innovation management, as well as processes like Lean Six Sigma to get there. If we seek to accomplish all these things, great things will start to happen within the company. You will be more attractive to investors who are looking to invest in high tech and med tech and life sciences. We can potentially create greater exit value as a result of doing these things. And of course, most importantly, we'll start to mitigate the risks on an ongoing basis of your intellectual assets program. I hope this was very helpful, and we have 5 minutes. We thought if there's any questions, we will take them now.
Thank you. So we have a few questions for you from our listeners. First question, do investors see a benefit to IP innovation management programs in the medtech and life sciences space?
The short answer is most definitely. Investors really are looking for, since value is so tied to protections, what type of protections do you have for these creations of the mind? I mean, your seed companies, or I should say startups and scale-ups in the high-tech industry and the med tech industry, that's their bread and butter. That's 95% of their company. So venture capital is looking more and more towards what types of protection are in place. And most importantly, with IP innovation management, if they're sinking in a few $1 million into a startup or a scale-up, who's minding the store internally of the IP and their investment? Almost every other company, or every other, I should say, investor have some sort of checks and balances when it comes to the operations of their business. I mean, yes, these venture capitals are typically on the board of their investments, but they're not in the day-to-day operations of managing the IP and mitigating the risks. So they are looking more and more towards using IP innovation management systems, not only to create greater value, but also to mitigate the risks and to make sure there is surety in doing so. Good question.
Thank you. Yes, next question. What are the first steps that we can take to begin an IP innovation management program? Do we do it ourselves or in conjunction with outside partners?
It's a great question. I think the first thing is really to start to begin to have the conversation. Again, you can use several people, although it's a rather nascent field where there certainly aren't many people who are practicing coaching and advising on IP innovation management standards of 56005. And so I think one of the things people can do is have a conversation with someone like me or others in the field about, listen, here's what we're trying to achieve, or maybe we're not sure exactly what we're trying to achieve, but can we have an initial discussion? And, I would imagine anyone would say sure, and they'd have a discussion with you on what it's all about, how you can start to begin to achieve these goals, to map out your processes, and how to develop a partnership together. Whether, again, it's part of it could be do it for me, and then once the training wheels are taken off, it's do it with me, and eventually do it myself with just occasional tune-ups. So all sorts of ways to approach it, and it starts with a conversation that really shouldn't cost anything.
Thank you. Last question. Many organizations believe that they already have a program for innovation. What are the additional benefits of IP innovation management and the International Organization of Standards?
I think one of the greatest benefits is it is a guideline that's uniform. I mean, realizing that you don't want to be so static and stuck in a particular methodology that doesn't fit your company or its culture. But at the same time, it's an objective framework that helps companies. And many companies believe, yes, we have it. But when you peel back the onion, you realize it's very sporadic and either implementation or ongoing execution. So I think these standards, certainly, you don't have to hold on to them with a lot of rigidity, because they should be agile and they need to be customized to your particular needs, but they provide a most effective framework to get started in this process.
That's great. James, thank you very much for your time today. Our viewers appreciate your understanding of how to utilize IP innovation management, a global standard that aids companies in consistently managing intellectual property risks and opportunities advantageous for healthcare and life sciences organizations.
By the way, just briefly, if anybody has any questions, just email me is probably the easiest, jhastings@rothwellfigg.com. And I'd be happy to have a conversation with you.
Thank you for joining us. This concludes today's webinar.